Good morning and happy Thursday. Welcome to the Indigenous Equity Podcast. Today is a pretty special podcast due to an unexpected but important issue Native people are facing nowadays. It is known that marginalized groups don't have the same attention, visibility, and rights as other members of society. The contemporary issues that Native American communities struggle with are critical concerns for all Americans. This podcast will be focused on unhealthy relationships in Native American communities, which will demonstrate the complexity and complications of ethnic and cultural diversity in the United States. The origin of abuse, specifically in indigenous people, has its roots in colonization. Having lived through genocide, abuse, and horrific suffering, the aftermath of European contact and colonization continues not only haunt Native Americans, it wreaks havoc in their everyday lives. Any type of maltreatment and violation to human rights is abuse. Abuse has the same meaning in all the languages, countries, cultures, and traditions. Therefore, it affects everyone, no matter the social context, background, socioeconomic status, religion, or ethnicity. Native American people are also victims of abuse regarding gender stereotypes, isolation, culture, rituals, economy, and relationships. As a matter of fact, indigenous people have higher probabilities of experiencing abuse in relationships. According to Strong Hearts Native Helpline, Native American and Alaska Native women experience the most elevated percentage of violence and murder in the United States. Although they face physical, sexual, psychological, and cultural abuse, most of them don't reach out for help or support. And without knowing, their silence protects violence and allows abusers to continue affecting other lives, especially women's lives. It is known by the society that relationships are strongly linked to cultural contexts, which means that perspectives vary depending on the community and the frame from reference. Healthy relationships are the ones that set boundaries and build up strong communication, respect, confidence, and equality. For indigenous people, these behaviors and patterns are the same, but with the addition that partners have to be sympathetic regarding heritage and ways of living. One inconceivable data is that the rate of violent crime for Native American women is higher than all other populations in the U.S., according to the U.S. Department of Justice. Unfortunately, exactly 84.3% of American Indian and Alaska Native women have experienced violence in dating relationships. This podcast specifically is highlighting the case of Hovi, a woman who mainly suffered cultural and spiritual abuse. According to India Country Today, there is an Ojibwe woman from Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians that faced dating violence in high school. Hovi fell in love for the first time in her sophomore year with someone who became abusive. At the beginning of the relationship, as many relationships, he was the perfect boyfriend. He was athletic, smart, gentle, and lovely. But through time, he started changing. He prohibited her from being with her friends, from going to cultural events, and from wearing some of her traditional costumes, which doesn't make any sense because he was also part of the community. He started to show an opposite version of the perfect boyfriend. He manipulated her by saying how relationships should be, because according to him, he had more experience than her in relationships. In this case, what he tried to do is to show her how women have to follow all the instructions men dictate. Thus, she took distance from her best friends, family, and culture. That was the worst consequence. However, she overcame that abuse and spoke out. The positive aspect is that situation made her a powerful feminist leader in the indigenous community. Now, she works in a high position for the group Strong Hearts Native Helpline that we mentioned before. And during the month of February, instead of promoting Valentine's Day and consumerism, she promotes awareness of healthy relationships. She is supporting those women who don't know how to end romantic relations, and she's helping them to how to stop any types of abuse. Therefore, she's an advocate of Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. Another important statistic that all of you have to be conscious of is that according to the CDC in 2021, around 1 in 11 women and 1 in 15 men suffered physical dating violence. Therefore, Hovi is making a call to all Native American girls to speak up, to ask for help, and to not be afraid of the situation. She's encouraging girls to contact the Strong Hearts Native Helpline for advice, answers for issues in relationships, and other type of assistance. Strong Hearts is a partnered effort combining the technology and infrastructure of the hotline with NIWRC's expertise and community connections, as well as the trust of Native advocacy groups. After talking and stating statistical data, let's focus again on Hovi. Hovi is an admirable woman for how strong she was to tell her story. Not everyone, especially women, have the power to speak. Many women are afraid of being judged. Hovi was not just physically and psychologically abused, she was also culturally and spiritually abused. Her ex-boyfriend restrained her from her indigenous traditions and heritage, but she transformed that bad situation into one from which she can advocate for other women. Nowadays, she's contributing to her community. She's promoting assistance for her community, aspect that makes a huge progress in Native American communities because sometimes they are not taken into account by others, especially the federal government. Now, let's remember, there's inequality between Native and non-Native people. The federal government focuses more on unhealthy relationships in non-Native American communities. Therefore, due to concerns of lack of attention to unhealthy relationships in Native American communities, many resources have been developed in order to advocate for women's rights and their safety. These resources have also the purpose to prevent, provide services and assistance, and educate indigenous tribes for their future relationships. Love is Respect was founded in 2007 as a project of the National Domestic Violence Hotline. The National Domestic Violence Hotline supports Native and non-Native young generations that have issues regarding dating violence. Moreover, Strong Hearts Native Helpline, the organization where the previous victim contributes to, was founded in 2017 with the hotline. Their mission is to advocate for Native people, their culture, and their rights. This program is controlled by domestic violence experts, victims of abuse, and the Family Violence Protection, in order to provide a wide and objective solution for women, especially girls who have suffered from dating violence. As a personal reflection, many people have doubt that Native American communities face these types of problems. However, the reality is different. Thanks to these sources and testimonies, people have perceived how indigenous tribes are higher in risk to suffer abuse. These sources will also provide prevention and support to young Native generations. Thank you to the audience for listening today about how indigenous people struggle but also solve their problems regarding unhealthy relationships. This podcast will contribute to Native teenagers. It will make them more conscious on how to help through the mentioned sources, themselves or a person that is facing this issue. Additionally, this podcast will show to non-Native people that all human beings have probability to experience this traumatic event. This podcast was produced and directed by Daniela Castiblanco.